The court herald announced her as the Terran trade delegate, and Sovereigna Idra Vel of the Rithani Empire did not bother to look up from the petition scrolls on her lap. Another human, another minor functionary sent to grovel for mineral concessions. Idra had received 6 of them this season alone, each one more tedious than the last, each one stumbling over Rithani court protocol and mispronouncing the names of her counselors. She initialed the scroll in her hand with a gold-tipped stylus and passed it to her seneschal, Lord Vithan, without a word. "Your Radiance," Vithan murmured, his silver-blue skin catching the sunlight that poured through the throne room's vaulted glass ceiling. "The Terran delegate is waiting." "Let her wait." Vithan's four-fingered hand tightened on the scroll. "She has been waiting for 3 days." "Then she has learned patience, a quality most Terrans lack." The throne room of the Rithani Imperial Palace was built to diminish visitors. Columns of pale rose quartz soared 40 meters to a ceiling of living crystal that refracted the twin suns' light into cascading rainbows across the marble floor. The throne itself sat on a dais of 7 steps, each step representing a dynasty, each carved with the lineage marks of the rulers who had ascended them. Idra sat at the apex in ceremonial robes of deep indigo silk threaded with platinum wire, her lavender skin luminous in the prismatic light, her silver-white hair coiled in the triple-crown braid that marked her as Sovereigna, absolute ruler of the Rithani, keeper of the eternal seat, voice of 12 billion souls. She was 29 years old. She had held the throne for 6 of those years, and every one of them had been a siege. "Send her in," Idra said, because the mineral concessions were real, and the Terran sovereignty's fleet had been uncomfortably present in the outer reach trade lanes for the past 18 months, and ignoring them entirely would create problems her treasury could not afford. The doors opened. The woman who walked in was not what Idra expected. She was tall for a human, nearly as tall as a Rithani, which was unusual. Dark hair pulled back from a face that was weathered in a way that spoke of years spent somewhere hard. Not soft diplomatic skin, not the polished look of an envoy trained in reception halls and conference rooms. She wore a charcoal gray coat cut in a style Idra did not recognize, neither military nor diplomatic, but something between the two, austere and precise. No jewelry. No insignia beyond a small silver clasp at her collar. She walked the length of the throne room without hurrying, without slowing, without the nervous adjustment of stride that most visitors adopted when they realized how far they had to walk and how many eyes were watching. She stopped at the base of the dais and inclined her head, not a bow, not the deep Rithani prostration that protocol demanded, but a measured acknowledgement that carried, somehow, the weight of an equal greeting an equal. That was the first thing that irritated Idra. "Sovereigna Vel." The woman's voice was low and clear, carrying easily in the vast chamber without straining. "I am Marin Sable. I carry credentials from the Terran Sovereignty's Office of External Affairs." "You are the 7th Terran delegate I have received this cycle," Idra said. "The previous 6 were unable to pronounce my seneschal's name. Shall we begin there?" The woman, Marin Sable, looked at Vithan. "Lord Vithan K. Lydris, Seneschal of the Eternal Seat, formerly of the 13th Border Prefecture." "Silence." Vithan blinked. Even the guards at the door shifted. Idra's eyes narrowed. "You have studied." "I have." "Studying does not impress me, delegate. The Thessians study. The Korathi study. They still come here wanting the same thing: access to our lithium reserves at prices that benefit their shipyards and impoverish our mining provinces." "I am not here for lithium." Idra paused. The petition scroll she had been reaching for stayed in Vithan's hand. "Then why are you here?" Marin Sable reached into the interior pocket of her charcoal coat and produced a data folio, not the standard diplomatic kind, but something older, leather-bound, with a clasp that caught the prismatic light and scattered it in a pattern Idra recognized. A Rithani seal, old, very old. This document was found in the archives of the Terran Sovereignty's Colonial Records Office on Hestia Station, Marin said. It is a copy of the Rithani Imperial Succession Charter, dated 712 years ago. It references a bloodline branch that was expelled from the Imperial Registry during the purge of the Third Dynasty. The throne room went cold. Idra rose. She did not remember deciding to rise. Her body moved before her mind caught up, and she was standing at the edge of the dais, looking down at this human woman who had walked into her court and spoken the words that no one in the Rithani Empire dared speak. The purge of the Third Dynasty was not discussed, not in court, not in the archives, not in the histories taught to Rithani children. 700 years ago, a succession war had torn the empire apart, and the losing branch, the Velkethani, had been erased. Their names were burned from the registry. Their estates were seized. Their bloodline was declared extinct. Idra's own dynasty, the Velidra, had risen on the ashes of that purge. Her throne existed because the Velkethani did not. "Where did you get this?" Idra's voice was quiet, which was worse than shouting, and everyone in the chamber knew it. The Terran Colonial Archives on Hestia Station. It was filed under a miscatalogued collection from a Rithani refugee settlement that existed briefly in Terran space during the aftermath of the purge. The settlement was disbanded within a generation. The documents were stored and forgotten. Forgotten? For 700 years, yes. Idra descended 2 steps. The indigo silk of her robes trailed behind her like ink spreading across the rose quartz. "And you bring this to my court, to the throne that exists because the Velkethani line was ended. What do you expect me to do with it, delegate? Reward you? Thank you for unearthing the bones my ancestors buried." Marin Sable did not step back. She stood at the base of the dais with the leather-bound document in her hands, and met Idra's gaze with a steadiness that bordered on insolence. "I expect you to read it, Sovereigna. The document does not only reference the Velkethani. It references a genetic marker, a specific sequence in the Rithani imperial bloodline that was used to verify succession claims. The marker was believed destroyed with the Velkethani line." Believed? It was not destroyed. It was carried out of the empire by the refugees, and it has resurfaced. In whom? Marin Sable's expression did not change. But something behind her eyes shifted, a flicker of something that was not diplomatic composure, but something older and harder, something that looked like a decision being made in real time. In a woman living under an assumed name in Terran space, a woman who does not know what she carries. Idra felt the blood drain from her face. She was grateful for the lavender of her skin, which hid the pallor. "You are telling me that a descendant of the Velkethani is alive. I am telling you that the genetic marker exists in a living person, and that the Terran Sovereignty became aware of it through a routine medical scan 3 months ago. And the Terran Sovereignty sent a trade delegate to deliver this information. The Terran Sovereignty sent me." The distinction was not lost on Idra. A trade delegate carried mineral concession proposals. Whatever Marin Sable was carrying, it was not a trade portfolio. Idra turned to Vithan. The seneschal's silver-blue face had gone ashen. He understood the implications faster than anyone else in the room. He had served 4 rulers, and he knew what succession crises looked like from the inside. "Clear the court," Idra said. The guards escorted the minor officials, the petition seekers, the archivists, and the 3 junior counselors from the chamber. Vithan remained. Marin Sable remained. The doors closed with a sound like a vault ceiling. Idra descended the remaining steps. She stood on the throne room floor for the first time in 6 years. She could not remember the last time she had come down from the dais to meet a visitor at eye level, and she was close enough to see the fine lines at the corners of Marin Sable's eyes, the faint scar along her jawline, the silver clasp at her collar that she now recognized was not Terran at all. It was Rithani, Old Rithani, the kind of clasp that fastened ceremonial robes 7 centuries ago. "Who are you?" Idra asked, not the diplomatic question. "The real one." Maren Sable's jaw tightened. The composure held, but the thing behind her eyes, the decision, pressed forward. "My name is Maren Sable. That is the name I was given by the family that raised me on Hestia Station. I was told my parents were Terran colonists who died in a mining accident when I was 3. And 6 months ago, I was treated for a respiratory infection at a Terran military hospital. The attending physician ran a standard genetic panel. The results were flagged by an automated system that cross-references genetic markers against known galactic databases. She paused. The system returned a match to the Rithani Imperial Succession Registry. Idra's hands were steady. She made them stay steady. "You are telling me that you are the Velkethani descendant." "I am telling you what the scan found. I do not know what I am. I was raised human. I look human." She held up her hands, human hands, 5 fingers, no Rithani ridge markings, no lavender undertone to the skin. "I was told nothing. I knew nothing. The Terran Sovereignty's Office of External Affairs approached me 3 months ago with the scan results and asked if I would carry the document to the Rithani court." "And you agreed?" "I agreed because I wanted to know the truth." Idra studied her. The woman's face was open in a way that Rithani faces were not trained to be. She was not hiding the uncertainty, the discomfort, the raw edge of someone who had been told that everything she knew about herself might be wrong. It was an expression Idra recognized, because she had worn it herself 6 years ago, when she was 23 and her mother died, and the throne fell on her shoulders like a mountain. "Vithan," Idra said without turning, "summon the Imperial geneticist." "Your Radiance, the implications of a formal genetic verification are mine to manage. Summon him." The Imperial geneticist, a stooped Rithani named Korath whose hands trembled with age but whose instruments were the most precise in the Empire, arrived within the hour. He took samples from Maren Sable's blood, her skin cells, a strand of her dark hair. He ran the analysis on an Imperial-grade sequencer in a sealed chamber adjacent to the throne room. While they waited, Idra paced. Vithan stood rigid by the door. Maren Sable sat on a stone bench and looked at her hands. 20 minutes in, Idra stopped pacing and looked at the human woman. Maren's composure had not cracked. She sat on the stone bench with her hands in her lap and her back straight, and her eyes focused on the middle distance with the quiet discipline of someone who had learned, somewhere in her life, to wait without complaint. It was not a soldier's discipline. It was subtler than that. It was the discipline of someone who had spent years in a job where patience was the only tool that worked. "You are remarkably calm," Idra said. Maren looked up. "I have spent 6 months preparing for this moment. The calm is not natural. It is manufactured." "Manufactured calm is still calm." "Manufactured calm is a decision. The alternative is panic, and panic does not serve anyone." Idra studied her. The woman's honesty was disorienting, not because honesty was unusual in the Rithani Empire, but because this particular kind of honesty, the kind that acknowledged its own construction, was something Idra had never encountered. Rithani court speech was built on the opposite principle: never acknowledge the machinery behind the mask. "What will you do if the test confirms the marker?" Idra asked. "I do not know." "You came here without a plan." "I came here with a document and a blood test, and 3 months of reading about an empire I did not know existed until recently. I did not come with a plan because a plan requires understanding, and I do not yet understand what any of this means." "It means you may be the legal heir to this throne." Maren's eyes met hers. "I know what it means for you, Sovereigna. I am asking what it means for me. I was a cargo logistics officer on a mining station 3 months ago. I organized shipping manifests. I resolved docking disputes between freighter captains. I ate my meals in a cafeteria that served reconstituted protein 3 times a day. If this test says I am Rithani royalty, that does not change who I was yesterday. It changes what other people will try to make me tomorrow. The words landed with a precision that reminded Idra of her own coronation, when the crown had been placed on her head, and she had realized, with a clarity that cut like crystal, that the crown did not make her a ruler. It made her a target. The results took 40 minutes. Korath emerged with a data slate and an expression that Idra had never seen on his face in 20 years of service to the court. He looked terrified. The marker is genuine, Korath said. Velkethani lineage, maternal line, 7 generations removed from the purge. The genetic drift is consistent with a population that has been living in Terran space. The human environmental markers have layered over the Rithani substrate, which is why she presents as fully human externally. Internally, her cellular architecture is Rithani hybrid. Her bone density, neural pathways, and organ configuration are within Rithani parameters. She is Rithani, Idra said flatly. She is half Rithani, carried through a maternal line that intermarried with humans over 7 generations but never fully lost the imperial genetic marker. The marker is dominant. It persists. Korath's hands shook as he lowered the data slate. Your radiance. Under the original succession charter, the one that predates the purge, this woman has a legitimate claim to the eternal seat. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Idra had ever heard. She looked at Maren Sable. Maren Sable looked back at her, and in the human woman's dark eyes, Idra saw something she had not expected, not ambition, not triumph, not the calculated gleam of someone who had just been handed a throne. She saw dread. I did not come here for a throne, Maren said quietly. I came here to understand what I am. What you are, Idra said, and her voice had the edge of something breaking, is the single greatest threat to the stability of this empire in 700 years. Vithan escorted Maren Sable to guarded quarters in the palace's eastern wing, comfortable but monitored, a diplomatic suite with crystal windows overlooking the imperial gardens and guards at every exit. Idra retreated to her private study and sat in the dark for a long time. She was furious. The fury was clean and familiar. She had lived with it since the age of 23, when the throne had been placed on her head, and every counselor in the empire had looked at her with the same expression. Too young, too female, too proud, too untested. She had spent 6 years proving them wrong, and now a woman had walked out of nowhere with a blood test and an old document and the power to undo everything. The fury burned for an hour. Then it cooled, and what remained was worse. The cold understanding that the fury was not really about the threat to her throne. It was about the fact that Maren Sable had walked into her court without flinching, had spoken truths that no one else dared speak, had met her eyes without deference or fear, and Idra had responded by treating her like an enemy. Because that was what pride did. It turned recognition into threat. Vithan returned at midnight. He stood in the doorway of the study, with the careful posture of a man who had delivered difficult news to 4 consecutive rulers and survived all of them. The Terran woman has requested nothing, he said. No communication channel, no meal preference, no audience. She asked the guard for a blanket and a reading terminal. She has been studying the Rithani legal code for the past 4 hours. Idra stared at the wall. She is preparing. She is reading about mining province labor laws, Your Radiance, Section 12, the section you reformed last year. That stopped her, my reforms. Specifically, the subsection on wage parity for deep shaft workers. She has read it 3 times. Vithan hesitated. I have served this court for 31 years. I have seen hundreds of visitors study our laws. They read the succession statutes. They read the trade regulations. They read the military provisions. I have never seen anyone read the mining labor reforms on their first night in the palace. Idra said nothing. The crack in the wall widened by another fraction. There is also, V then continued, the matter of her clasp. I noticed it. It is Velkethani ceremonial, 3rd dynasty style, pre-purge manufacture. The metallurgical signature is consistent with Rithani foundry work from 7 centuries ago. She may not know what it is. It may have been passed down through her maternal line as a family keepsake without context. But it is genuine. A woman who does not know she is Rithani, wearing a Rithani artifact she does not understand, reading reforms that no one else in the empire cared enough to study. Idra closed her eyes. Go to bed, Vithan. Your Radiance. I need to think, and I need to do it without an audience. Vithan bowed and withdrew. Idra sat alone in the dark study and listened to the silence of a palace that had been holding secrets for 700 years. By morning the court knew. Idra did not know how. Vithan swore the geneticist had been sworn to silence, and Korith was not the type to talk. But courts were organisms. They breathed secrets the way lungs breathed air, and by the time the twin suns cleared the horizon, the whisper had spread through every corridor and antechamber in the palace. A Velkethani descendant had been found. She was human. She was in the eastern wing, and the Sovereigna had ordered genetic verification. Lord Disivran arrived at Idra's study before she had finished her morning tea. Disivran was the head of the Imperial Council's traditionalist faction, a towering Rithani with cobalt-dark skin and eyes like polished obsidian who had opposed every reform Idra had attempted since her coronation. He bowed with the precise depth that protocol demanded, and not a millimeter more. Your Radiance must understand the position this places the Council in. The Council has no position yet. The verification is private. The verification ceased to be private when 20 guards were reassigned to the Eastern Wing overnight. The court is not blind. Idra set down her tea. What does the Council want, Disivran? The Council wants clarity. If this woman is Velkethani, the succession charter, the original pre-purge charter, gives her a legitimate claim. The traditionalist faction has always held that the purge was an act of political expedience, not legal succession. There are members of the Council who believe the original charter should be restored. Members who have spent 6 years trying to remove me from this throne through every other means available. Disivran's expression did not change. The law is the law, Your Radiance. If the original charter stands, the Velkethani line has precedence. The original charter was superseded 700 years ago. Superseded by force, not by law. Idra stood. She was not as tall as Disivran, but she had learned that height was less important than stillness, and she held herself with the kind of absolute composure that made taller beings feel uncertain. You will not use this woman as a weapon against me, Disivran. She is a person, not a legal instrument. She is a succession claim. What she is beyond that is irrelevant. Get out. Disivran bowed again, the exact same depth, and left. Idra went to the eastern wing. She walked the corridor alone, no Vithan, no guards, no aide transcribing her movements. The corridor was lined with portraits of former sovereignas, each rendered in the Rithani style of luminescent pigment on crystal panel. Idra had walked past them 1,000 times without stopping. She stopped now. Between the portrait of Sovereigna Velkethais II and Sovereigna Velidra I, the transition point, the purge, there was a gap. An empty crystal panel where a portrait had been removed 700 years ago. The mounting brackets were still visible, oxidized to a dull copper, holding nothing. She had looked at that gap every day for 6 years. She had never touched it. She pressed her fingertips to the empty panel. The crystal was cold and smooth, and held no memory of the face that had once looked out from it. She kept walking. The guards admitted her without question, and she found Marin Sable standing at the crystal windows of her suite, looking out at the imperial gardens. The gardens were spectacular at this hour, terraced beds of phosphorescent flora that caught the first light and glowed in alternating waves of violet and gold, cascading down the hillside toward the river that bisected the palace grounds. Marin turned when Idra entered, and her expression was the same one from the throne room. Open, uncertain, braced for impact. "You slept?" Idra asked. "No." Idra had not slept either. She did not say so. She crossed the suite and stood at the opposite end of the window, leaving a deliberate distance between them, the same kind of diplomatic distance she maintained in every interaction, the careful space that kept her safe and kept everyone else at arm's length. "The court knows," Idra said. "My chief political opponent is already positioning to use your claim against me. He will argue that the original succession charter supersedes the post-purge amendments, and that your bloodline gives you precedence over mine." Marin's jaw tightened. "I told you I did not come for a throne." "What you told me does not matter. What matters is what Disivrin can do with your existence. You are a legal fact now. A fact that threatens the stability of an empire I have spent 6 years holding together." "Then send me home." "I cannot. You have been genetically verified by an imperial geneticist in the palace. The record exists. Sending you home does not erase it. Disivrin will file a formal challenge whether you are present or not." Marin turned from the window. In the morning light, Idra noticed things she had missed in the throne room: the way Marin held her shoulders, squared and steady, the posture of someone who had carried weight long before she arrived here. The scar along her jaw was thin and old, and Idra wondered what had put it there. "What do you want from me?" Marin asked. The question was direct in a way that Rithani speech never was. Rithani communication was layered, subtext beneath subtext, meaning wrapped in courtesy, wrapped in implication. Humans, Idra had been told, said what they meant. She had not believed it until now. She realized, standing in that suite with the morning light through the crystal, that she did not know how to answer a direct question with a direct answer. Every response that formed in her mind was layered, cushioned by the habits of a lifetime in a court where naked honesty was a weapon used against you. She did not say what she was thinking, not yet. "I want to understand why the Terran sovereignty sent you," Idra said. "Not a diplomat, not an ambassador. You. A woman who did not know what she was until 3 months ago. They could have sent the document through formal channels. They chose to send the document and the person." Marin was silent for a long moment. "The woman who recruited me, the director of external affairs, said that the document alone would be dismissed as a forgery. She said that a living person, standing in the court, willing to submit to verification, was the only thing that would force the Rithani to acknowledge the truth. The truth about the purge. The truth that the Velkethani survived. That 700 years of pretending they did not exist was a lie." Idra's chest contracted. She knew the purge was unjust. Every sovereign since had known it, quietly, privately, the way you know that the foundation of your house was built on a grave. But knowing it and having someone say it to your face were different things, and the difference burned. "You are remarkably comfortable accusing my dynasty of 700 years of injustice," Idra said, and her voice was colder than she intended. Marin met her eyes. "Your dynasty, not you. You did not purge anyone. You inherited a throne that was built on a crime, and you have spent 6 years trying to rule justly within a system that will not let you acknowledge the crime it was built on. That is not an accusation. That is an observation." The silence between them was different from the diplomatic silences Idra was accustomed to. It was not calculating. It was not waiting for advantage. It was the silence of two people standing in a room where truth had been spoken, and neither of them knew what to do with it. "You are either very perceptive," Idra said, or the Terran sovereignty briefed you extremely well? I spent 3 months reading everything I could find about the Rithani Empire, about you, about the 6 years you have spent fighting your own council to reform trade policies, expand mining province rights, and reduce the military budget that your predecessors used to suppress dissent. You are not your dynasty, Sovereigna, but your dynasty is your prison. Idra turned away. She looked at the gardens, the phosphorescent flora shifting from violet to gold in the climbing light, and she felt something crack in the wall she had spent 6 years building. Not collapse, not breach, just a crack thin as a hair through which something unexpected was leaking in. She could not afford it, not now, not with Disivrin circling. The council will convene tomorrow, Idra said. Disivrin will file a formal succession challenge. The law requires that you be present. And what happens then? Then the council debates whether the original charter supersedes the post-purge amendments. If they rule that it does, you have legal precedence over me. If they rule that it does not, Disivrin loses his challenge and the post-purge order stands. And you want me to argue against my own claim? Idra looked at her. I want you to understand what is at stake. If Disivrin wins, he does not put you on the throne. He puts himself behind the throne. You would be Sovereigna in name. He would be the power. He has been trying to control this seat since before I was born, and you would be the instrument he uses to finally succeed. Marin's expression shifted. The uncertainty was still there, but something else was rising beneath it, the same hardness Idra had seen in the throne room. The quality that said this woman had survived things that had nothing to do with thrones or succession charters. I did not come here to be anyone's instrument, Marin said. Then we have that in common. The words settled between them like an anchor finding the seabed. Idra turned to leave, then stopped at the doorway. The clasp you wear at your collar, do you know what it is? Marin's hand went to the silver clasp. The gesture was unconscious, protective, the reflex of someone touching something precious without thinking. My mother, my adoptive mother, gave it to me before she died. She said her grandmother had given it to her and her grandmother's mother before that. She called it a lucky piece. She did not know where it came from. It is Velkethani ceremonial silver, 700 years old, the last artifacts of a dynasty that was supposed to be erased. Marin looked down at the clasp. Her fingers traced its surface, the small, worn markings that time and generations of handling had softened but not destroyed. She kept it, Marin said quietly. Every woman in my line kept it. They did not know what it was. They kept it anyway. Idra's throat tightened. 700 years. 7 generations of women passing down a piece of metal they did not understand, carrying a history they had been denied, holding onto something that their empire had tried to destroy. And the woman standing in front of her had worn it into the throne room of the dynasty that had burned her ancestors' names. I will see you at the council session, Idra said, and left before the crack in the wall could widen any further. That afternoon, the situation escalated. The Korathi trade envoy, a broad-shouldered diplomat named Tesserin, who had been negotiating mineral rights with the Rithani for months, requested an emergency audience. Idra received him in the small reception chamber adjacent to the throne room. The Korathi Compact has become aware of the succession claim, Tesserin said without preamble. The Korathi were not a species given to pleasantries. Our government requires clarification on whether the current mineral negotiations will be honored in the event of a succession change. There will be no succession change. Lord Disivrin has filed a formal challenge. If the challenge succeeds, any agreement signed by the current Sovereigna may be subject to review by the successor. The challenge will not succeed. Tesserin studied her with flat amber eyes. The Korathi Compact does not gamble on political assurances, your radiance. We gamble on legal certainties. Until the challenge is resolved, Our negotiating team is instructed to suspend discussions. The mineral negotiations represented 18 months of work. They were the centerpiece of Idra's economic reform program, fair market pricing for Rithani lithium, that would fund the mining province development she had been fighting for since her coronation. Disivran's challenge had not even reached the council floor, and it was already costing her. The Seraphine trade delegation has also signaled a pause, Vithan reported after Tesserin left, and the Drellin Compact has recalled their economic attaché for consultations. 3 trade partners, 3 suspended negotiations. Disivran had not needed to win the challenge. He had only needed to file it. He is using the uncertainty as a weapon, Idra said. He has always used uncertainty as a weapon, your radiance. That is why he waited until the genetic verification was confirmed before filing. The claim is credible enough to create doubt, and doubt is sufficient. Idra pressed her fingertips against the edge of the reception desk until the stone bit into her skin. She had held this throne through 6 years of attacks, budget fights, procedural challenges, a brief military standoff on the northern border that Disivran had tried to use as grounds for emergency authority. She had survived all of it through preparation, through discipline, through the refusal to show weakness. But this was different. This attack was not aimed at her policies or her competence. It was aimed at her legitimacy, and the weapon was not a legal argument. The weapon was a woman who had surrendered nothing, asked for nothing, and wanted nothing except the truth. An hour before the session, Vithan intercepted a message. Lord Disivran had sent a private invitation to Marin's quarters, an offer to meet discreetly before the proceedings. The invitation was phrased with impeccable courtesy, a senior counselor extending welcome to a distinguished visitor, nothing more. Vithan brought it to Idra. She declined, he said. She declined. She sent the message back unopened. The guard says she told him, I will speak to the council, not to factions. If Lord Disivran has something to say, he can say it in the chamber where everyone can hear it. Idra stared at the wall. A cargo logistics officer from a mining station had just refused a private audience with the most powerful political operator in the Rithani Empire, not because she did not understand the game, because she refused to play it. Your Radiance, Vithan said carefully, this woman is either the most principled person I have encountered in 31 years of court service, or the most sophisticated operative the Terran sovereignty has ever produced. Which do you believe? Vithan considered for a long time. I believe she is a cargo logistics officer who has spent her life resolving disputes fairly, and who does not understand why anyone would approach conflict differently. That is either admirable or dangerous. It is both, your Radiance. Most admirable things are. The council session was a battlefield dressed in ceremony. The Imperial Council Chamber was a circular room of white stone and pale gold, with tiered seating for the 36 councillors arranged in concentric rings around a central floor. Sunlight poured through a domed crystal ceiling, casting everything in warm amber. Idra sat in the Sovereigna's chair at the highest tier, looking down at the chamber floor where Disivran stood with a cadre of 6 traditionalist councillors behind him, and a formal challenge folio in his hands. Marin Sable stood at the opposite side of the floor, alone. She wore the same charcoal coat. The Rithani clasp at her collar caught the sunlight. The council recognizes the formal challenge filed by Lord Disivran Calthethos under Article 9 of the Succession Charter, the council speaker announced. The challenge asserts that the pre-purge charter retains legal force, and that the genetic verification of the Terran national Marin Sable establishes a Velkethani succession claim with precedence over the current Velidra line. Disivran spoke first. He was eloquent, precise, and devastating. He laid out the legal argument with the care of a surgeon, the original charter's language, the absence of a formal legal process during the purge, the precedent established by 3 pre-purge rulings that had affirmed the Velkethani line's primacy. He never raised his voice. He never looked at Idra. He spoke as though he were arguing before a court of law, not attempting to depose a sitting ruler. The Velkethani line was not ended by law, Disivrin concluded. It was ended by violence. Violence does not create legal succession. The post-purge amendments were ratified by a council that had just participated in the elimination of the opposing faction. That is not jurisprudence. That is the codification of a crime. The chamber murmured. Councillors exchanged glances. A reformist councillor, Lady Sethara Velrin, who had co-authored Idra's mining reform legislation, stood. A point of clarification, Lord Disivrin. You argue that the purge was illegal. Does the traditionalist faction then concede that every action taken under the post-purge government, including the military campaigns, the territorial expansions, and the trade compacts that built the empire as it exists today, was also illegitimate? Disivrin's jaw tightened. The faction argues that the succession was illegitimate. The governance that followed is a separate matter. It is not a separate matter. If the post-purge charter is invalid, every decree issued under it is void, including the traditionalist faction's own founding charter, which was ratified by the post-purge council. Sethara sat down. The point landed like a blade between ribs. 3 more councillors spoke. The centrist bloc asked procedural questions. An independent raised concerns about the trade negotiations that had already stalled. Each intervention added pressure, and each pressure added heat, and the chamber temperature, metaphorical but palpable, climbed steadily. Idra sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her expression the mask she had perfected over 6 years of being underestimated and challenged and tested. She watched Marin. The human woman stood on the chamber floor with 36 Rithani councillors looking down at her, an alien in an alien court, alone, with no allies and no advocates, and no understanding of the 1,000 unspoken rules that governed every breath taken in this room. She should have looked lost. She should have looked overwhelmed. She looked steady. She stood the way she had stood in the throne room, without hurrying, without adjusting, without the nervous recalibration that marked someone out of their depth. Her dark eyes moved across the tiered seats, reading the chamber the way a soldier reads terrain, and Idra realized, with a jolt that traveled from her chest to her fingertips, that Marin Sable was not intimidated. She was assessing. The council invites the claimant to speak, the speaker said. Marin Sable stepped forward. She did not look at Disivrin. She did not look at the traditionalist bloc. She looked at the chamber as a whole, and when she spoke, her voice carried the same low clarity that had filled the throne room. 3 months ago, I was a cargo logistics officer on Hestia Station. I organized shipping manifests and resolved docking disputes. I had never heard of the Velkethani. I had never been to Rithani space. I did not know that my blood carried a marker that connected me to a dynasty that was destroyed before my species had achieved faster-than-light travel. She paused. The chamber was silent. Lord Disivrin's legal argument may be correct. I am not a jurist, and I cannot speak to the validity of a 700-year-old charter, but I can speak to what I have seen in the 3 days I have spent in this palace. Disivrin's obsidian eyes narrowed. I have seen a sovereigna who sits on a throne that was given to her by history and holds it through competence. I have seen reform legislation that expanded mining province, rights legislation that Lord Disivrin's faction opposed. I have seen trade policies that opened Rithani markets to fair exchange policies that Lord Disivrin's faction blocked for 2 years before they were enacted by executive order. I have seen a young ruler fighting her own government to do what is right, and I have seen the government fighting back with every tool available, including, now, me. The murmur in the chamber rose. Disivrin's jaw tightened. I am not a legal instrument, Marin said. I am a person who came here to learn the truth about herself. The truth is that my ancestors were expelled from this empire 700 years ago. The truth is that the purge was unjust. The truth is that 7 generations of women in my family passed down a small silver clasp without knowing what it was, because something in them, something deeper than memory, deeper than language, told them to hold on to it. She touched the clasp at her collar. The chamber watched the gesture, and even from the Sovereigna's tier, Idra could see Disivrin's eyes track the motion, track the small, worn piece of Velkethani ceremonial silver that had survived 7 centuries of exile. Those truths do not change because I refuse to be used as a weapon against the only ruler who has tried to make this empire better. I have read the mining province reforms. I have read the trade equity legislation. I have read the wage parity statutes for deep shaft workers. I know what this Sovereigna has been fighting for, and I know what her opposition has been fighting against, and I will not be the tool that undoes 6 years of work that should have been done 700 years ago. She turned to Idra, and in the amber light of the council chamber, with 36 counselors watching and the crystal dome pouring sunlight across the white stone floor, Maren Sable said the thing that no one in the chamber expected. I formally withdraw any succession claim arising from the Velkethani genetic marker. I recognize Sovereigna Idra Vel as the legitimate ruler of the Rithani Empire, and I ask the council to do what 700 years of silence have prevented: acknowledge that the purge was wrong, and that the Velkethani line existed, and that their descendants deserve to be remembered, not as a succession threat, but as people who were wronged. The chamber erupted, not in the controlled murmur of deliberation, in the sharp, fractured sound of 36 counselors realizing simultaneously that the ground had shifted beneath them. Disivrin stood motionless, his challenge folio still in his hands, his legal argument rendered irrelevant by the claimant's own words. The traditionalist bloc exchanged rapid glances, recalculating. The reformist counselors, Idra's allies, the ones who had supported her trade and mining reforms, sat forward in their seats with expressions that balanced between relief and astonishment. Idra's mask held, but behind it, something was moving, something vast and unexpected, something that pressed against the inside of her ribs and made her eyes sting in a way she had not allowed in 6 years. This woman, this human, this cargo logistics officer from a station Idra had never heard of, had just surrendered the most powerful legal claim in the empire, not because she was weak, not because she was naive, because she had looked at the situation and decided that justice mattered more than power. That was not something Idra had ever encountered in a Rithani court. The speaker called for order. Disivrin withdrew his challenge. He had no choice, with the claimant herself repudiating the claim, and filed a formal objection to the withdrawal, which the speaker noted for the record and set aside for procedural review. The chamber adjourned. The counselors filtered out in clusters, whispering, calculating, already repositioning for whatever came next. Vithan appeared at Idra's side. His silver-blue face was carefully neutral, but his eyes, his old, experienced, 31 years of service eyes, were not. "Your Radiance," he said quietly. "In 31 years I have never seen a visitor to this court surrender power voluntarily. I have seen it seized, traded, inherited, stolen, and hoarded. I have never seen it given back." Idra looked at her seneschal, the man who had served 4 rulers, the man who had watched her take the throne at 23 and who had never, in 6 years, offered a personal opinion. "What are you telling me, Vithan?" "I am telling you that the woman on that floor just did something that no Rithani has done in 700 years, and that you should consider what that means before you decide what to do next." He stepped back. Idra descended from the Sovereigna's tier. She crossed the chamber floor. She stopped in front of Maren Sable. They were the same height. Idra noticed it now, noticed the way Maren's dark eyes met hers without looking up or down, the way they stood on the same level for the first time, without a dais between them. "You did not have to do that," Idra said. Yes, I did. He would have lost the challenge. I had the votes. Maybe, but the challenge would have taken months. It would have consumed your government. Every reform you are fighting for would have stalled while the council debated a 700-year-old charter. Disivrin knew that. The challenge was never about putting me on the throne. It was about stopping you. Idra looked at her. The fury was gone. The cold strategic calculation was gone. What remained was the crack in the wall, wider now, and the thing leaking through was something Idra had not felt since before the throne, before the siege, before the years of holding everything together by force of will, and refusing to let anyone close enough to see what it cost. Come with me, Idra said. Where? Somewhere that is not a chamber or a court, or a room designed to make people perform. She led Marin through a corridor that the councillors never used, a private passage that connected the council chamber to the imperial gardens through a series of arched doorways cut from the same rose quartz as the throne room columns. The guards followed at a distance. Idra did not dismiss them, but she walked far enough ahead that their conversation was private. The gardens were in full bloom. Phosphorescent flora shifted through deep violets and electric blues interspersed with pale gold terraced hedges. The river bisected the grounds, clear enough to see smooth stones at the bottom, and the twin suns cast overlapping shadows that gave everything a soft, doubled edge. Idra stopped at a bench overlooking the river. She sat. After a moment, Marin sat beside her. I owe you an apology, Idra said, for treating you like a threat when you walked into my court, for making you wait 3 days, for responding to your honesty with hostility. You were protecting your throne. I was protecting my pride. My throne was never in danger. The reformists hold a majority, and Sethara Velrin alone controls 7 reliable votes. I was never going to lose the challenge, and I was hostile anyway because the threat was not to my throne. It was to my story about myself. She paused. I have spent 6 years telling myself that I hold this seat through competence, through discipline. And you walked in and showed me what I did not want to see, that the throne I am defending was built on a crime. And my discipline, all of it, serves a system that began with injustice. Marin waited. The gift of space again, the patience of someone who understood that not every silence needed filling. You spoke to me as an equal, Idra continued, without deference, without agenda, without wanting something from me. Everyone in this empire wants something. Every counselor, every diplomat, every petitioner. You walked in with the most powerful claim in the empire and surrendered it because it was the right thing to do. Marin was quiet for a long moment. The river murmured over its stones. I did not surrender it only because it was right, Marin said. I surrendered it because I watched you sit on that throne for 3 days, and I saw something I recognized. I saw someone holding everything together alone, someone who had been carrying the weight so long she had forgotten what it felt like to set it down. I saw someone who needed an ally, not another enemy. The words reached through the crack in the wall, the one that had started as a hairline fracture in the throne room, and widened it into something Idra could not close. You do not know me, Idra said. The words were a defense and they both knew it. No, but I know what it looks like when someone is holding the line alone because I have been that person, not on a throne. On a station, in a job no one noticed, carrying responsibilities no one acknowledged, wondering if the weight would ever let up long enough for me to breathe. She turned to Idra, and her dark eyes were entirely unguarded in a way Rithani eyes never were, because Rithani were taught to guard themselves from birth, to wrap meaning in subtext. Humans did it differently. I am not your enemy, Savarina. I am not your rival. I am a woman who found out 3 months ago that she is connected to a place she has never been, and the only person in this entire empire who has spoken to me honestly is the one who should have the most reason to want me gone. Idra looked at the gardens. The twin suns had reached their apex, and the phosphorescent flora dimmed in response, their glow unnecessary in the flood of natural light. "I have been so concerned with holding this throne," Idra said, "that I forgot why I wanted to hold it. The reforms, the mining provinces, the trade equity. The reason the throne matters is not the throne, it is what the throne can do." She looked at Marin, and the mask fell. Not dramatically, it simply lowered, like a visor, and beneath it was a 29-year-old woman who had been holding the weight of an empire since the day her mother died, and who was, in this moment, in a garden with a stranger who was not a stranger, so tired of carrying it alone that the prospect of someone seeing her was more terrifying than any succession challenge. Marin extended her hand palm up, an offering, not a demand, just a hand open, saying without words, "You do not have to carry this alone." Idra placed her hand in Marin's, palm to palm in the bright midday light, and the weight she had been carrying for 6 years shifted, not gone, not lifted, but shared. "Stay," Idra said. The word came out before she could stop it. "In the palace, in the empire, not as a succession claim, not as a political instrument, as someone who sees me." "I see you," Marin said. "I have seen you since I walked into that throne room and you tried to make me small. I watched you and thought, she is holding the line alone, and she is magnificent, and she is so tired." Idra's eyes burned. A single drop of moisture tracked down her lavender cheek. The crack in the wall was not a crack anymore. It was a door. "I will stay," Marin said. That evening, Idra addressed the council in an emergency session. She stood on the chamber floor, not seated in the high tier, but standing at the same level where Marin had stood hours earlier. "The succession challenge has been withdrawn. The matter is closed, but the truth that brought it forward is not." She let the words settle across the 36 faces watching from the tiered seats. 700 years ago, the Velkethani line was purged. Their names were burned. Their estates were seized. Their descendants were driven into exile and forgotten. This was not justice. This was not law. This was a crime committed by my predecessors, and every sovereign since has known it and said nothing. That silence ends today." She paused, the pause of someone stepping off a ledge. "I am issuing an executive decree. The Velkethani line is restored to the imperial registry. Not as a succession claim, the post-purge amendments remain in force, but as an acknowledgement. Their names will be unburned. Their history will be taught. And Marin Sable, last known descendant of the Velkethani, will be received at this court as an honored citizen of the Rithani Empire." Disivrin rose. His obsidian eyes were unreadable, but his voice was stripped of its usual political edge. "The traditionalist faction notes the decree," Disivrin said, "and concurs." The chamber reacted, a rustling of robes, the sound of 35 counselors recalibrating their understanding of a man they thought they knew. "The original charter's core principle was not succession primacy," Disivrin continued. "It was recognition, the right of every Rithani bloodline to be acknowledged. Restoring the registry corrects the violation without disturbing the current legal order. The traditionalist faction supports the decree." For the first time in 6 years, the council voted unanimously. Afterward, when the chamber had emptied and the crystal dome showed the first stars of the Rithani sky, Idra found Marin at the gallery railing, looking down at the chamber floor where she had surrendered a throne. "The Korathi envoy is requesting a meeting tomorrow to resume the mineral negotiations," Idra said. "He specifically asked that you be present as a Terran liaison. He said, and I am quoting V then quoting him, that any government whose opposition chooses to surrender power rather than seize it is a government the Korathi can do business with." "Logistics officer to Terran liaison," Marin said. "That is a promotion I did not apply for." Idra leaned against the railing beside her. The stars through the dome were different from Terran stars, brighter, closer, arranged in patterns that humans saw as unfamiliar and Rithani saw as the map of their ancestors wandering. You said you would stay. I said I would stay. The court will talk. They will say that the Sovereigna invited a Velkethani descendant to remain at the palace for political reasons. And what will you say? Idra looked at her. The starlight caught the silver clasp at Marin's collar, the old Rithani clasp, the one artifact that had survived 7 generations of exile, and it gleamed as though it belonged here. I will say that I invited her to stay because she saw me, because in 29 years in this palace and 6 years on that throne, no one has ever done that. They see the Sovereigna, they see the title, they see the crown. She turned to Marin fully, and the starlight was gentle on both of them, on lavender skin and human skin, on silver-white hair and dark hair. You saw Idra. Marin's hand found hers. Their fingers laced together carefully, deliberately, the way 2 people do when they are building something that neither of them fully understands yet, but both of them know is real. I saw Idra, Marin said, and I see her now. They stood together in the empty council chamber, hand in hand, under a dome of stars that belonged to both of them. The decree was signed. The names were being restored. The 700-year silence was breaking, and what was growing in its place was not a treaty, not an accord, not a political arrangement. It was the simplest thing, the oldest thing, the thing that courts and councils and succession charters could never quite contain. Recognition, freely given, freely received. Outside the dome, the stars of the Rithani sky burned in patterns that Marin was only beginning to learn. She would learn them. She would learn the language and the protocols, and the layered subtext that governed every breath in this palace. And Idra would learn the other thing, the direct thing, the honest thing, the human quality of saying what you meant and meaning what you said and trusting that clarity was not a weakness. They would build it together, not a treaty, not an accord, something older and more durable, the thing that happened when 2 people stopped performing and started seeing. Enough to start with, enough to build on. Enough